kind of doing it both sides, or you're losing some of that flexibility. You're adding more beams than you would otherwise. Okay, not a huge thing. More beams distributing the dose is a little more time to deliver. But you all have to then be concerned about the intensity of each fluence beam to make sure they exactly match up so the compensation of right to left is consistent. The other problem, which I honestly don't know if it's a major or minor problem, if you are using fluence modulation and you do have pixels, these are called pixels, basically beamlets that are compensating for this effect, but they're modulated next to each other because of the field shaping, there's an explicit action assumption that the patient doesn't move between those beams because the heterogeneity follows the tissues, not the beams. And so if you think you're compensating, but the tissue moved from the right lateral to the left lateral, and you have fluence modulation, then your matching isn't exactly perfect. And so now you start leaving your 15%. Maybe it's comfort level. Maybe it's not. You're leaving your 15% and coming to some unknown place between the 15 at one extent and the 48 at the others. So I argue that this is not a trivial problem to be managed. And I'm not saying that medical physicists in clinics that have this patient aren't managing it. I'm just saying it has to be managed. And it's just not such a huge issue for the V-rate because of this field. And remember, that was selected on purpose to avoid precisely this. So the exit dose, it's like a gap, but there's no other surface. It's like a huge heterogeneity, and it causes problems when you're having tangents, for example. Tangents, the beams are tangential, and each beam has its own exit. And in fact, this paper written by Van Heist and others shows the schematic of the electron return effect, and then some quite striking skin irradiation caused by that when you have parallel opposed fields, for the reasons we just mentioned. Similarly, you can look at doses within lungs, and I don't really have time to sort of show the comparisons of the doses in detail inside the lung. This is basically the colors are color wash, or the comparison of the dose with the magnetic field on. Here, their deviation with the magnetic field, and you do a little more research to see how the doses in realistic dose distributions in lungs, how those degrade or don't degrade with magnetic fields. But I can assure you that it's a much bigger problem than we have to. So accuracy, that's really what this was about, in the sense that I want to deliver a certain dose. The electron return effect causes perturbations. I can somewhat modulate that by having parallel opposed fields, but then I lose potentially some conformality because I have fewer beams to deal with. I believe that internal cavities and exodos will probably be a significant clinical concern at 1.5 Tesla because of the very tight diameter curvature and the very short range that they have to travel to do that 180-degree path. What I didn't mention is because exodos is a heterogeneity to the air, it could be reduced with bolus. So if there's an exodos in like someone's back, and there aren't any other beams like enter the beams, you could put some bolus on the back and that would solve some of that returning dose. But it's something that has to be taken care of. In breast, it presumably could be also, but then you have the distortion of the breast. I argue fluence-based compensation, which I didn't really mention. So fluence-based compensation is the concept that, okay, I know there are hot and cold spots because of the electron return effect. I'm going to pump up or down fluences to increase or decrease and compensate for those small, remember they're very small and sharp hot and cold spots. And in principle, you can do some of that, but the hot and cold spots follow the heterogeneities. They're in the patient coordinates, whereas the fluence follows the room or the machine coordinates. And so if there's any disconnect between those two, either immediately after replanning, so replanning and before treatment, or between the original plan and the treatment, you can actually have over and under compensated. The compensatory thing can move off, and you're not compensating one place, and you're compensating where you don't need it in another place, and you can see that coming up, especially when you're talking about 40-ish% of fluids, 48% of perturbation. So the second one is dose conformality. V-Ray decided to use a double-focused